I used to think success was about big decisions, massive changes, perfect discipline. I thought one day I would finally wake up motivated enough, focused enough, confident enough to become the person I kept imagining in my head. The kind of person who wakes up early without forcing it, who follows through, who stays consistent, who doesn't constantly restart their life every Monday morning. But that never happened. Instead, my life became a cycle of almost disciplined, almost focused, almost confident, almost becoming someone I could respect. And after a while, that kind of disappointment starts becoming personal. Because when you keep breaking promises to yourself, you stop trusting yourself. You begin to hesitate before even starting. Not because you're lazy, but because some part of you no longer believes your own words. I know that feeling deeply. The feeling of watching months disappear while telling yourself you'll change soon. The feeling of consuming endless self-improvement content without actually feeling different. The feeling of being exhausted, not from work, but from constantly fighting yourself. And maybe you felt that too. Maybe you've started over more times than you can count. Maybe there are goals you stopped talking about because it hurts too much to admit you still want them. Maybe you secretly wonder if other people have something you don't. More discipline, more drive, more clarity. I used to think that too, until I realized something that changed my entire life. Success is rarely built through dramatic moments. It's built quietly, in small decisions people barely notice, in habits that seem too simple to matter. And honestly, that realization frustrated me at first because I didn't want small changes. I wanted transformation. I wanted my life to change fast enough to erase the guilt of wasted years. But real change didn't happen when I forced myself to become someone new. It happened when I stopped chasing intensity and started rebuilding trust with myself. Quietly, one habit at a time, one kept promise at a time, one ordinary day at a time. And this audiobook is not about becoming perfect. It's not about waking up tomorrow as a completely different person. It's about something much more important. Learning how to build a life you can finally rely on. A life where your habits stop working against you. A life where discipline stops feeling like punishment. A life where your mind becomes calmer, your direction becomes clearer, and your confidence stops depending on motivation. Because motivation disappears. Everyone learns that eventually. But the people who quietly change their lives learn something else too. They learn how to continue without it. And before we go deeper, I want you to understand something I wish someone told me years ago. You're probably not failing because you're incapable. You're failing because your life has been built around inconsistency for too long. And inconsistency does something dangerous. It creates shame. Not loud shame, quiet shame. The kind that follows you into the morning. The kind that makes simple tasks feel heavier than they should. The kind that whispers, "Here we go again." That was my life for years. I would make plans late at night, full of hope. Tomorrow I'll wake up early. Tomorrow I'll finally focus. Tomorrow I'll become disciplined. But tomorrow kept turning into another version of yesterday. And eventually, I stopped feeling motivated by self-improvement. I started feeling tired of myself. That was the real low point. Not failure, self-disappointment. Because deep down I knew exactly what I needed to do. I just didn't trust myself to keep doing it. And that's where everything started changing. Not when I discovered some revolutionary strategy. Not when I found perfect motivation. But when I asked myself one uncomfortable question: what if success has nothing to do with becoming extraordinary, and everything to do with becoming consistent? That question led me into a completely different way of living. A quieter way, a slower way, but also the first way that actually worked. And strangely enough, the first habit that changed my life looked almost too small to matter. Chapter 1. I thought I was lazy. For a long time, I genuinely believed I was lazy. Not temporarily unmotivated, not overwhelmed, not burned out. Lazy because from the outside, my life looked like a person who simply refused to follow through. I would get excited about changing my life and then disappear from my own plans a few days later. Sometimes a few hours later, I would create routines I couldn't maintain, write goals I couldn't sustain, promise myself things I quietly broke by the end of the week, and every time it happened, I told myself the same thing: you just don't want it badly enough. That sentence followed me everywhere, especially at night, because nights were dangerous for me. At night, I became ambitious. I became reflective. I became honest enough to admit I wasn't happy with who I was becoming. So I would sit there in bed watching motivational videos, saving productivity clips, writing goals in notebooks I eventually abandoned. And in those moments, I truly believed change was coming. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow I would wake up earlier. Tomorrow I would focus. Tomorrow I would finally become disciplined. But morning always exposed the truth. The alarm would ring. My brain would already feel tired. I would reach for my phone without thinking. And within minutes, the version of me who made all those promises the night before was gone. Replaced by distraction, delay, excuses. And slowly something painful started happening. I stopped believing myself. That's the part people don't talk about enough. The real damage of inconsistency is not missed goals. It's broken self-trust. It's looking at your own plans with skepticism. It's hearing yourself say, "I'm going to change," and immediately feeling doubt. You've probably felt that too. You make a plan with full sincerity, but another part of you quietly whispers, "Yeah, we've said this before." That internal conflict drains people more than failure itself, because eventually you stop feeling inspired by your potential. You start feeling haunted by it, and the worst part, I was surrounded by people who made discipline look easy. People waking up at 5 in the morning, people building businesses, people staying consistent at the gym, people talking about routines like they were normal. Meanwhile, I felt like I was fighting my own mind every single day. Even small tasks felt heavy sometimes. Answering messages, cleaning my room, starting work, focusing for 30 minutes. Everything required negotiation. And because I didn't understand what was happening internally, I labeled myself with the simplest explanation possible. Lazy, but one day, something shifted, not dramatically, quietly. I remember sitting alone after another failed attempt to restart my life. Another perfect plan ruined within days. And honestly, I was tired of hearing my own promises. Tired of consuming advice. Tired of pretending motivation was going to save me. So instead of asking, "How do I become successful?" I asked a different question. What if I'm not lazy at all? That question bothered me. Because if laziness wasn't the problem, then what was? And slowly, I started noticing patterns. I noticed I only relied on motivation. I noticed my routines were unrealistic. I noticed I was trying to transform my entire life overnight, instead of building one stable behavior at a time. But more importantly, I realized I was mentally exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. There's a kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly disappointing yourself, a quiet exhaustion. The kind that makes simple discipline feel emotionally heavy, because every new attempt carries the weight of previous failures. That was my real problem. Not laziness, accumulated self-doubt. And once I saw that clearly, I stopped attacking myself for struggling. I started paying attention instead. That changed everything, because self-awareness creates compassion, and compassion creates space for change. Not excuses, change. For the first time, I stopped trying to build an impressive life overnight. Instead, I tried something embarrassingly small. One promise, just one, not 10 habits. Not a complete transformation. One thing I could complete daily without negotiating with myself. Some days it was making my bed. Some days it was walking for 10 minutes. Some days it was writing down the 3 most important things I needed to do. That's it. And honestly, part of me thought it was pointless. How could tiny habits possibly change a life that felt this messy? But what I didn't understand yet was that consistency is more psychological than physical. The habit itself matters less than the message it sends. Every completed promise was teaching my brain something new. Maybe I can trust myself again. Maybe I'm not broken. Maybe discipline is not something you're born with. Maybe it's something you rebuild quietly. And that idea stayed with me, because even though my life wasn't transformed yet, something inside me had started changing. For the first time in years, I felt a small sense of control returning. But I still had one major problem. I was completely ignoring the habit that would eventually change everything. Chapter 2. The habit I didn't respect. At the time, I thought real success had to feel dramatic. I thought changing your life meant waking up one morning filled with unstoppable energy. Like something inside you finally clicked, like discipline suddenly became natural. That's what I kept searching for. A breakthrough, a transformation, some powerful shift that would permanently change who I was. But instead, the habit that quietly started changing my life looked almost insulting in its simplicity. It was boring, small, easy to ignore, and honestly, that's exactly why I underestimated it for so long. Every night before going to sleep, I started resetting my environment. That was it. Nothing impressive. I would clean my desk, put my phone away, write down the most important task for tomorrow, prepare my clothes, clear visual clutter. Then sleep. That tiny routine took maybe 10 minutes, and at first it felt meaningless, because when people imagine success habits, they imagine grinding, extreme routines, 4 a.m. wake-ups, cold showers, relentless discipline. Nobody gets excited about cleaning a desk, but what I didn't realize yet was that chaos drains you quietly, and I had been living in chaos for years. Mental chaos, digital chaos, emotional chaos. My room was cluttered, my sleep was inconsistent, my thoughts were scattered. My attention belonged to everything except my actual life. So every morning started with friction. I would wake up already overwhelmed, already mentally behind, already reacting instead of leading myself. And when your environment constantly creates friction, discipline feels harder than it actually is. That realization hit me hard, because for years I thought I lacked motivation. But sometimes I simply lacked structure. There's a huge difference. Motivation asks, do I feel like doing this? Structure asks, what did I already decide? Successful people understand this quietly. They reduce decisions, reduce friction, reduce resistance. Meanwhile, most people rely on emotional energy they don't consistently have. That was me. Every day felt like negotiating with myself. Should I focus? Should I work out? Should I start now? Should I wait until later? Those tiny internal debates exhausted me more than the actual work, and the strange thing is, my life didn't start improving because I became more intense. It improved because I became more intentional. That small evening reset routine started changing my mornings, not perfectly, but noticeably. I woke up calmer, clearer, less mentally scattered, and for the first time in a long time, my days stopped feeling accidental. That matters more than people realize, because when your life feels accidental, you stop feeling powerful inside it. You feel reactive, like life is happening to you instead of through you. But small habits slowly restore personal control, quietly. And here's something nobody tells you about personal growth. Most life-changing habits feel stupid in the beginning, because your brain is addicted to dramatic change. It wants immediate transformation, immediate confidence, immediate results. But real self-development rarely looks exciting while it's happening. It looks repetitive, ordinary, sometimes even disappointing. That's why most people quit too early. They judge habits based on emotional intensity instead of long-term impact. I made that mistake for years. I would abandon simple routines because they didn't feel powerful enough. Meanwhile, those exact routines were the missing foundation underneath everything else. And eventually, I started noticing something surprising. I wasn't constantly trying to fix my life anymore. I was slowly stabilizing it. That's different. A lot of people are trapped in emergency self-improvement, always restarting, always chasing motivation, always trying to escape their current self. But stability changes you differently. Quietly, instead of emotional highs and crashes, you begin building trust in your own rhythm. And honestly, that feeling is underrated, because peace is productive. A calm mind makes better decisions. A prepared environment reduces resistance. A simple routine protects your future self from your emotional self. That became one of the biggest mindset shifts of my life. Success habits are not about becoming superhuman. They're about making good decisions easier to repeat. That's all. And once I understood that, I stopped asking, how do I completely transform my life? I started asking, how do I make tomorrow slightly easier? That question changed everything, because sustainable discipline grows from support, not punishment. And slowly, without realizing it, I started becoming someone more reliable. Not perfect, reliable. There's a difference. Perfect people don't exist, but reliable people change their lives. And for the first time, I could feel that possibility becoming real. But there was still one thing sabotaging me constantly. Something I depended on too much without realizing it. Motivation. Chapter 3. Why motivation kept failing me. For most of my life, I treated motivation like a solution. I thought disciplined people had simply figured out how to stay motivated longer than everyone else. So I chased motivation constantly. I watched videos when I felt low, read quotes when I felt stuck, consumed self-improvement content like it was fuel. And for a few hours, sometimes a few days, it worked. I would feel energized, focused, ready to change my life again. But eventually, every burst of motivation ended the same way. Silence, resistance, avoidance, and then guilt. always guilt, because nothing hurts quite like watching yourself slowly abandon your own goals again, especially when you were genuinely excited about them. That's what confused me the most. I wasn't pretending to care. I truly wanted to change. I wanted discipline. I wanted clarity. I wanted a better future. So why couldn't I stay consistent? Why did motivation disappear so fast? And one day, I realized something uncomfortable. Motivation had become my emotional permission slip. I only took action when I felt emotionally ready. That was the trap. If I felt inspired, I worked. If I felt confident, I focused. If I felt energetic, I showed up. But life doesn't consistently give you those emotions. Some mornings you wake up anxious. Some days your brain feels heavy. Some weeks you feel emotionally disconnected from your goals entirely. And if your habits depend on motivation, your progress becomes unstable. That realization changed the way I saw successful people, because disciplined people are not always motivated. They simply stop negotiating with every emotion they feel. That's the difference. Most people wait to feel like it, but consistency belongs to people who act before the feeling arrives. That sounded impossible to me at first, because I had spent years believing emotions controlled behavior. But slowly, I started noticing something strange. The hardest part of almost every task was beginning. Not the workout, not the writing, not the studying. Starting, my brain resisted the beginning of things constantly, and the more pressure I placed on myself, the heavier starting became. That's why I kept creating dramatic plans that failed. I made action feel emotionally enormous. Everything felt too important, too serious, too overwhelming. So naturally, my brain avoided it. But then I discovered one simple habit that quietly changed how I approached discipline: the 2-minute rule. And honestly, it sounded too simple to work. The rule was this: make starting so easy your brain can't justify resistance. That's it. If I needed to work out, I only had to start for 2 minutes. If I needed to write, just open the document. If I needed to clean, just begin one corner. No pressure to finish, only pressure to begin. At first, my ego hated this approach because I wanted intensity. I wanted dramatic transformation. But what I actually needed was momentum. There's something powerful that happens once movement begins. Action creates emotional shift, not the other way around. That realization completely rewired how I approach self-improvement. I stopped asking, how do I stay motivated? I started asking, how do I reduce resistance? That question matters more than people realize, because your future is often shaped by tiny moments of avoidance: a delayed task, a postponed decision, a habit skipped just for today, and those moments seem harmless individually. But repeated avoidance slowly becomes identity. You begin seeing yourself as inconsistent, undisciplined, unreliable. That identity becomes dangerous because people eventually act according to who they believe they are. I did that for years. I identified as someone who struggles with consistency. So every failure reinforced the story. But small actions started interrupting that identity quietly. Every time I started before feeling ready, I proved something to myself. Maybe emotions don't control me as much as I thought. Maybe discipline is less emotional than I imagined. Maybe successful people simply build systems that continue through emotional weather. That idea stayed with me deeply, because motivation feels powerful, but systems feel dependable. And deep down, what I truly wanted wasn't inspiration. It was stability. I wanted to trust my own behavior, to know that even on bad days I could still move forward. Even slowly, even imperfectly. That's real growth, not emotional intensity. Repeated action. And once I understood that, I stopped romanticizing motivation. I stopped waiting for perfect mental states. I stopped believing productive people always feel productive. Most of them don't. They just learned how to act without emotional permission. That lesson changed everything for me, because the moment you stop worshiping motivation, you start building discipline. Quietly. But even after learning that, there was still one part of my life destroying my focus every single morning. And honestly, I didn't realize how much damage it was causing until I finally stepped away from it. Chapter 4: The Quiet Morning Shift. I used to lose my mornings before they even started. And the strange part is, I didn't realize it was happening. I thought my problem was discipline. But my mornings were quietly training my mind to become distracted, reactive, and overwhelmed before the day even began. The alarm would ring and almost automatically I reached for my phone. Not intentionally, habitually, just a quick check. Messages, notifications, social media, emails, news, videos, other people's lives, other people's urgency, other people's opinions. And within 10 minutes of waking up, my attention no longer belonged to me. That's the part nobody warns you about. Your mornings shape your mental state more than your motivation does, because the first thing you consume each day often becomes the emotional tone of your entire day. And mine was chaos, comparison, noise, pressure, distraction. By the time I actually tried to focus on my own goals, my mind already felt scattered, heavy, pulled in 20 different directions. And honestly, I thought this was normal. I thought everyone lived this way. Constant stimulation, constant urgency, constant mental noise. But one morning after another anxious start to the day, I noticed something uncomfortable. I hadn't had a single quiet moment with my own thoughts in weeks, maybe months. The second I woke up, I escaped into stimulation. And that realization hit me hard, because deep down, I knew I wasn't avoiding boredom. I was avoiding myself, avoiding stillness, avoiding the uncomfortable feeling that my life wasn't moving the way I wanted. So instead of facing that feeling, I distracted myself from it every morning. That's when I decided to try something small. No phone for the first 30 minutes after waking up. That was the habit, simple, quiet, almost boring. And honestly, the first few mornings felt uncomfortable, very uncomfortable, because silence exposes things distraction hides. I suddenly became aware of how restless my mind actually was. How quickly I searched for stimulation, how uncomfortable I felt just sitting still with myself. But slowly, something started changing. My mornings became calmer, not magically productive, calmer, and that calmness changed everything, because calm people think differently. They react differently. They make decisions differently. For the first time in years, my mornings stopped feeling rushed. I would wake up, drink water, sit in silence for a few minutes, sometimes journal, sometimes just breathe and think. Then I would write down the most important things I needed to do that day, not 20 tasks, not impossible goals, just a few clear priorities, and something strange happened. My focus improved, not because I suddenly became more motivated, but because my mind stopped beginning the day in survival mode. That's a huge difference. Most people are overstimulated before they even begin working. Their nervous system is already exhausted by the time real focus is required. Then they blame themselves for lacking discipline. But attention is fragile, and modern life constantly attacks it. That's why protecting your mornings matters so much. A quiet morning is not just peaceful, it's strategic. It trains your brain to lead instead of react. And once I experienced that shift, I started understanding something deeper about success habits. Real discipline is often invisible. It's not loud, not dramatic, not performative. Sometimes discipline looks like sitting quietly with a notebook while the world screams for your attention. Sometimes discipline looks like protecting your energy before spending it. And honestly, that morning habit changed more than my productivity. It changed my relationship with myself. Because for years, my inner world felt crowded, noisy, unclear. But silence creates awareness, and awareness creates direction. That's why successful people often protect solitude so carefully. Not because they hate people, because clarity requires space. I didn't understand that before. I thought productivity was about doing more. But often, it's about removing more, removing noise, removing distraction, removing unnecessary mental weight. And the more I protected my mornings, the more I noticed another shift happening. I was becoming intentional again, not reactive. Intentional. That feeling is powerful, because reactive people spend their lives responding. Intentional people slowly shape their lives instead. Quietly. And maybe you felt this too, that sense that your attention no longer belongs to you, that your mind is constantly interrupted, constantly overstimulated, constantly tired without understanding why. If that's true, your problem may not be laziness, it may be overload. An overloaded mind struggled to hear their own direction clearly. Mine definitely did. But every quiet morning started reconnecting me with myself again, slowly. And over time, those mornings became something deeper than a routine. They became evidence. Evidence that I could lead myself instead of abandoning myself. And that lesson mattered more than I realized, because the next habit I learned forced me to confront something painful. The real reason I lacked confidence for so many years. Chapter 5, The Success Habit of Keeping Promises to Yourself. For most of my life, I thought confidence came first. I thought confident people naturally took action because they believed in themselves. But eventually, I realized something painful. I didn't lack confidence because I failed. I lacked confidence because I stopped trusting myself. There's a difference. Failure hurts, but self-betrayal changes how you see yourself. And I betrayed myself constantly, not in dramatic ways, quiet ways, small promises broken every day. I'll wake up early tomorrow. I'll start working tonight. I'll stop procrastinating. I'll be more disciplined this week. And every time I didn't follow through, something invisible happened. My mind recorded it. That's what people don't understand about discipline. Your brain is always watching your behavior, always collecting evidence about who you are. And for years, I gave myself evidence that I couldn't be trusted. That realization hit me hard one night. I remember sitting alone after another unproductive day, feeling frustrated with myself again. And I noticed something strange. Whenever I planned something important, there was already doubt attached to it. Even before I failed, I would say, tomorrow I'm going to focus. But emotionally, it already felt uncertain, like part of me no longer believed my own words. That scared me. Because once you lose trust in yourself, everything becomes harder. Simple habits feel heavier. Goals feel unrealistic. Motivation disappears faster. You hesitate before committing to anything because deep down you expect disappointment. And maybe you've felt that too. Maybe the hardest part isn't starting anymore. Maybe the hardest part is believing this time will actually be different. That was my reality for years. I consumed mindset motivation constantly. Read books, watched videos, tried routines, but confidence never lasted. Because confidence built through emotion disappears with emotion. Real confidence is built differently, quietly through evidence. That changed how I saw self-improvement forever. Because suddenly, discipline was no longer about punishment. It was about rebuilding trust. And rebuilding trust requires something very specific. Kept promises. Not huge promises, small ones, promises simple enough to complete consistently. That became one of the most important success habits of my life. Every day I gave myself one non-negotiable promise. Just one. And no matter how I felt emotionally, I completed it. Some days the promise was tiny. Read 5 pages. Go for a short walk. Work for 20 minutes. Journal before bed. Simple. But the size of the habit wasn't the point. The consistency was, because every completed promise sent a new message to my brain. Maybe I can rely on myself. Maybe my words actually mean something again. That feeling is powerful. People think discipline creates results, but first, discipline creates identity, and identity changes everything. When you see yourself as someone reliable, your behavior shifts naturally, not perfectly, but consistently. That's real personal growth, not becoming superhuman overnight, becoming someone who stops abandoning themselves. And honestly, this process was emotional for me, more emotional than I expected, because I started realizing how much pain came from disappointing myself repeatedly, not other people. Myself. That kind of pain is difficult to explain. It's quiet, private, heavy. It follows you into ordinary moments. You feel it when you avoid mirrors, when you procrastinate important work, when you stop talking about your goals because you're tired of hearing yourself say them. That pain changes people slowly. It makes them smaller, more hesitant, less hopeful. And the dangerous part is, most people try to solve that pain with more motivation. But motivation cannot repair broken self-trust. Only action can, repeated action, tiny proof, tiny integrity, tiny moments where you say, I will do this, and then actually do it, even when nobody sees it, especially then, because private discipline changes you differently. It creates self-respect, and self-respect creates a kind of calm confidence external validation never can. I started noticing that shift slowly. I walked differently, thought differently, spoke differently, not because my life suddenly became successful, but because I stopped feeling disconnected from myself. For the first time in years, my actions and intentions started aligning. That alignment creates peace, and peace creates momentum. But even as my discipline improved, there was still another problem draining me every single day. A hidden habit that was quietly stealing my energy, focus, and attention without me realizing how much damage it was causing. Chapter 6. How I stopped wasting my best energy. For a long time, I thought I needed more time, more motivation, more discipline. But eventually, I realized something uncomfortable. I didn't have a time problem. I had an energy leak problem. My attention was constantly being drained by things I barely noticed. My phone, notifications, mindless scrolling, saying yes when I wanted to say no. Overthinking conversations for hours, consuming information I never used. living in a constant state of mental interruption. And the strange thing about modern exhaustion is this: you can feel tired without doing anything meaningful. That was my life for years. By the end of the day, my brain felt exhausted, but I had nothing important to show for it. That feeling is dangerous, because eventually you start believing you're incapable of focus, but focus is difficult when your mind never fully rests. I remember one specific afternoon that forced me to confront this honestly. I sat down to work on something important, something I genuinely cared about, and within 15 minutes I had already checked my phone multiple times, opened random tabs, switched tasks, replied to unnecessary messages, watched videos I didn't even enjoy, and suddenly an hour disappeared. Then another. And by the end of the day, I felt frustrated with myself again. Not because I lacked ambition, because I lacked control over my attention. That realization hurt, because deep down, I knew my distractions were no longer accidental. They were emotional escapes. Every time work became uncomfortable, I escaped. Every time I felt uncertain, I reached for stimulation. Every time silence appeared, I filled it immediately. And maybe you know this feeling too. You sit down to focus, but your mind feels addicted to interruption. Not because you're weak, but because distraction has become your default coping mechanism. That's what happened to me. I wasn't just distracted, I was overstimulated, constantly consuming, rarely reflecting. And eventually I noticed something even more dangerous. The things draining my energy were also shaping my identity, because attention shapes direction. What you repeatedly give your attention to slowly becomes your life. That thought changed me, because suddenly, protecting my attention felt serious. Not dramatic, serious. I started asking myself difficult questions. Why am I giving my best mental energy to things that don't improve my life? Why do strangers online receive more focus from me than my actual goals? Why does my phone control my attention more than my future does? Those questions forced me to change some habits. Quietly, I turned off unnecessary notifications, stopped sleeping next to my phone, created periods of deep work with no distractions, reduced random scrolling, started saying no more often, not aggressively, intentionally, because people-pleasing was draining me too. That's another hidden energy leak nobody talks about enough. Constantly managing other people's emotions, constantly over-explaining yourself, constantly saying yes because you fear disappointing people. That behavior slowly disconnects you from your own priorities, and eventually you become emotionally available for everyone except yourself. I lived like that for years, always reachable, always distracted, always mentally fragmented. And fragmented attention creates fragmented progress. That's why protecting your energy matters so much. Not just physical energy, mental energy, emotional energy, creative energy. Successful people are often less distracted than everyone else. That's the difference. Not necessarily smarter, not necessarily more talented, just more protective of their focus. Once I understood that, I stopped treating attention casually, because where attention goes, life follows. That became one of the most powerful mindset shifts in my personal development journey. I realized I did not need constant stimulation to feel alive. I needed clarity, space, direction, and strangely enough, life started feeling slower after I removed some distractions. In a good way, I noticed conversations more, thought more clearly, focused longer, felt calmer internally. My mind stopped feeling constantly crowded, and that calmness gave me something I had been missing for years: presence. I was finally in my own life again instead of mentally escaping it all day. That shift is hard to explain until you experience it. Because overstimulation disconnects people from themselves quietly. They become reactive, emotionally scattered, unable to sit still long enough to hear what they actually need. That used to be me, but slowly I stopped feeding every impulse immediately. I stopped letting every notification interrupt my thinking. I stopped treating my attention like it belonged to the world. And over time, I noticed something surprising. Discipline became easier. Not easy, because my brain was no longer exhausted before important work even began. That's the hidden cost of distraction. It steals the energy required for meaningful change. And honestly, one of the biggest acts of self-improvement is simply learning what deserves access to your mind, because your attention is your life. And once I understood that, I started becoming much more careful about where mine went. But the biggest shift of all happened later at night when I discovered one habit that finally made me feel in control of my life again. Chapter 7. The habit that made me feel in control again. For a long time, my life felt blurry. Not terrible all the time. Not chaotic every second. Just blurry. Days passed quickly. Weeks disappeared quietly, and no matter how much self-improvement content I consumed, I kept repeating the same patterns, same distractions, same emotional crashes, same unfinished goals. It felt like life was moving faster than my awareness of it. And honestly, that's a frightening way to live, because when you stop paying attention to your own behavior, you slowly lose control of your direction. That was happening to me. I was living reactively, not intentionally. I would wake up, go through the motions, feel overwhelmed, distract myself, promise to do better tomorrow, then repeat the cycle again. And the strangest part, I rarely stopped long enough to examine what was actually happening. That changed one night when I sat down with a notebook after an especially frustrating day. Nothing dramatic had happened. That's what made it worse. I had simply wasted another day without meaning to, hours lost to distraction, mental clutter, avoidance, and I remember thinking, how many days like this have I already lived? That question stayed with me, because deep down, I knew the dangerous part of wasting time is that it rarely feels dramatic while it's happening. Life usually drifts quietly, one distracted day at a time, one postponed goal at a time, one avoided conversation at a time, and eventually years disappear. That realization scared me enough to finally start paying attention. So I created one small nightly habit. Before sleeping, I reviewed my day. That was it. Simple. No complicated journaling system, no pressure to write pages, just honesty. Every night I asked myself a few questions. What gave me energy today? What drained me? What distracted me? What actually mattered? What kind of person did I behave like today? That last question changed me the most, because for years, I focused almost entirely on outcomes. Did I succeed? Did I fail? Did I finish everything? But those nightly reflections forced me to look deeper, at patterns, at emotions, at behavior, at identity. And slowly, I started noticing things I had ignored for years. I noticed how often I used distraction to escape discomfort. I noticed certain people exhausted me emotionally. I noticed my anxiety increased when I overloaded my schedule. I noticed I felt calmer on days when I kept simple promises to myself. Awareness started changing me automatically. That's the power of reflection. You cannot consistently change behavior you refuse to observe. Most people live unconsciously for too long, not because they're incapable of growth, because they never slow down long enough to see themselves clearly. That used to be me. Constant movement, constant stimulation, very little self-awareness, but journaling created something unexpected. Space, and space creates clarity. For the first time in years, I stopped reacting to life automatically. I started understanding myself. That's a powerful shift. Because self-awareness reduces self-conflict. You stop fighting invisible patterns. You finally see them, and once you see them, you can change them, quietly. One of the most surprising things about this habit was how calming it became. Those nightly reflections started feeling less like productivity and more like a conversation with myself. Not judgment. Conversation. That distinction matters, because many people approach self-improvement aggressively. Constant criticism, constant pressure, constant disappointment. But growth happens faster when awareness is honest instead of cruel. I wish I understood that earlier. For years, I thought harshness would make me stronger. But harshness mostly made me exhausted. Self-awareness worked differently. It created understanding, and understanding created better decisions naturally. Over time, those nightly reviews became proof that I was no longer asleep inside my own life. I was paying attention now, and attention changes behavior. That's why journaling became one of the most important success habits I ever built. Not because writing magically solves problems, because reflection interrupts unconscious living, and unconscious living destroys potential quietly. Maybe you felt this too. That strange feeling of drifting through your own life, being busy constantly but not truly moving forward, feeling mentally exhausted without understanding where your energy actually went. Most people never stop long enough to investigate that honestly. But when you do, everything starts changing. Slowly, you become more intentional, more aware, more emotionally honest, and eventually you stop feeling powerless against your own habits. That was happening to me. For the first time in years, I felt connected to my own direction again. But there was still one lesson I had not fully accepted yet, a lesson that almost made me quit the entire process. Because after all this growth, after all these small changes, success still felt unbelievably boring sometimes. Chapter 8. Success became boring before it became beautiful. Nobody tells you this part. Nobody talks enough about how repetitive personal growth actually feels, because when people imagine transformation, they imagine dramatic change. Big moments, massive breakthroughs, instant confidence. But real success habits often feel painfully ordinary while they're working. That truth almost made me quit, because after building better routines, protecting my mornings, keeping promises to myself, reducing distractions, I expected to feel different faster. I expected some emotional reward, some powerful moment where I suddenly felt transformed, but instead, most days felt quiet. Repetitive, almost boring. Wake up, focus, work, reflect, sleep, repeat. And after a while, a dangerous thought started creeping into my mind. Is this really it? That thought scared me. Because part of me still craved intensity, still craved emotional high, still wanted dramatic proof that my life was changing. But growth rarely announces itself while it's happening. That's what I hadn't understood yet. Real transformation is usually invisible at first. You notice it later. In your reactions, in your mindset, in the way you handle stress, in the way you speak to yourself, in the way you stop abandoning your responsibilities. The moment emotions change, but while you're living through it, it often just feels repetitive. That's why consistency is so difficult, not because habits are impossible, because repetition feels emotionally unrewarding before it becomes meaningful. And honestly, this was one of the hardest chapters of my entire self-development journey. Because boredom triggered old behaviors inside me. When life became repetitive, I wanted stimulation again. Quick dopamine, quick excitement, new plans, new goals, new identities. I wanted to reinvent myself instead of continuing the slow process of becoming stable. Maybe you felt that too. You start making progress, but eventually the process loses emotional excitement, and suddenly, distraction becomes tempting again. Quitting becomes tempting again, starting over becomes tempting again. That cycle destroys a lot of people quietly because they mistake boredom for failure. But boredom is often a sign that a habit is becoming normal, and normal behaviors shape identity. That realization changed everything for me. Because suddenly I stopped asking, how do I stay excited? I started asking, how do I become consistent enough that good habits feel ordinary? That's a completely different mindset. Successful people do not rely on constant emotional intensity. Their habits become automatic standards. Quiet behaviors repeated long enough to become identity. That's what was slowly happening to me. I noticed it in small moments first. I would begin work without arguing with myself for 30 minutes. I would clean things immediately instead of postponing them. I would protect my mornings automatically. I would journal without forcing myself, not perfectly, naturally, and that shift felt subtle. But it was life-changing because identity had finally started replacing effort. That's the hidden goal of discipline. Not forcing yourself forever, becoming someone who no longer negotiates basic behaviors constantly. And honestly, that process changed my emotional world more than my external life at first. I became calmer, more stable, less chaotic internally. I stopped experiencing extreme swings between motivation and guilt. That alone improved my quality of life tremendously. Because emotional chaos is exhausting. Living inconsistently is exhausting. Constantly restarting your life is exhausting. But rhythm creates peace. There's something deeply healing about becoming predictable to yourself in a healthy way. Waking up and knowing you'll show up. Not because you feel amazing, because it's who you are now. That feeling cannot be faked. It's earned quietly, one repeated action at a time. And eventually, I realized something important. The habits that change your life are usually not impressive individually. The power comes from repetition. A single workout changes little. A year of workouts changes identity. One focused morning changes little. Hundreds of focused mornings change a future. That's how success actually works for most people. Quietly. Accumulated effort. Accumulated discipline. Accumulated self-respect. And once I fully accepted that, I stopped searching for transformation everywhere else. I stopped chasing motivational highs constantly. I stopped expecting life to change overnight. Instead, I focused on becoming the kind of person who could repeat healthy behaviors long enough for change to become unavoidable. That mindset changed everything, because consistency compounds, even when emotions don't. And eventually, I looked back and realized something terrifying. If I had continued living the way I used to live, I would have slowly lost years of my life without even noticing. Chapter 9. The Life I Almost Missed. Sometimes I think about the version of my life that almost happened, the version where nothing changed, not dramatically. Quietly, the version where I kept postponing growth, kept waiting for motivation, kept distracting myself from uncomfortable truths, kept restarting instead of rebuilding. And honestly, that thought scares me more now than failure ever did, because most people do not ruin their lives all at once. They drift away from themselves slowly, one distracted year at a time, one abandoned goal at a time, one repeated excuse at a time. That was almost me. And the dangerous part is, from the outside, my life probably looked normal. That's why this kind of stagnation is difficult to detect. You still laugh sometimes, still go to work, still scroll, still make plans, still tell yourself there's time. But deep down, you know you're not becoming who you could be. That feeling is painful, not loud, quiet, like carrying invisible regret before your life has even fully happened yet. I remember having moments where I would look at older versions of myself and feel something heavy in my chest. Not hatred, grief. Grief for the person I could have become if I had trusted myself earlier, if I had stopped abandoning my goals every time life became uncomfortable, if I had protected my attention sooner, if I had respected small habits sooner, if I had understood that consistency matters more than intensity. That realization changed how I viewed time forever. Because people think they have unlimited chances to become disciplined later. Later I'll focus. Later I'll take care of myself. Later I'll stop wasting time. But later quietly becomes a lifestyle, and eventually years disappear. That truth forced me to confront something uncomfortable. My habits were not just shaping my routines, they were shaping my future identity. Every repeated behavior was becoming evidence of the person I was becoming. That's serious, because your future is not built from intentions. It's built from repeated actions. And once I truly understood that, I stopped seeing small habits as small. I started seeing them as direction. A 10-minute walk is direction. A focused hour is direction. Going to sleep on time is direction. Keeping one promise to yourself is direction. And direction matters more than speed. That mindset changed my relationship with progress completely. I stopped obsessing over dramatic results. I became more focused on trajectory. That's one of the most important mindset shifts in personal growth. You don't need to become perfect immediately. You need to stop moving in the wrong direction repeatedly. Because tiny changes in direction eventually create completely different lives. I saw that clearly when I started imagining two futures. The first future was familiar, still distracted, still inconsistent, still waiting for the right time, still escaping discomfort through stimulation, still doubting myself constantly. And honestly, that future felt emotionally exhausting. But then there was another version, not perfect, not wildly successful overnight, just stable, focused, calm, reliable. A person who wakes up and follows through. A person who trusts their own words. A person whose habits support their future instead of sabotaging it. That version felt peaceful. And for the first time, I realized success might not actually be about achievement. Maybe it's about alignment. Aligning your actions with the life you secretly want. That realization hit me deeply. Because most people already know what matters. They know the habits that would improve their lives. The real struggle is emotional. Fear, inconsistency, avoidance, self-doubt. That's why rebuilding self-trust matters so much. Without self-trust, even simple goals feel emotionally heavy, but with self-trust, life becomes lighter. Not easier, lighter. Because your mind stops fighting itself constantly. That's one of the greatest gifts discipline gave me. Internal peace, not perfection peace. I no longer woke up every morning disappointed in myself. I no longer carried the constant guilt of wasted potential everywhere I went. I no longer needed motivation to feel hopeful, because my habits started giving me evidence that my future was changing. Quietly and honestly, that feeling is difficult to describe until you experience it. When your life finally stops feeling like something you're trying to escape, and starts feeling like something you're slowly building with intention. That's real transformation, not becoming someone else. Returning to yourself. returning to the version of you that was buried underneath distraction, inconsistency, and self-doubt for years. And maybe you are closer to that version of yourself than you realize. Maybe your life does not need another dramatic restart. Maybe it needs quieter habits, more honesty, more consistency, more self-respect. Because the life you want is often hidden inside behaviors you keep dismissing as insignificant. That's what I learned. And the final lesson surprised me most of all. Because after everything changed, I realized success had become something completely different than what I originally chased. Chapter 10. The habits that quietly changed everything. When I first started this journey, I thought success would feel loud. I thought it would look like constant motivation, massive achievements, perfect discipline, a completely transformed personality. But after all the struggle, all the inconsistency, all the quiet rebuilding, success ended up feeling very different than I imagined. It felt peaceful. That surprised me the most. Not exciting every second. Not dramatic, peaceful, because for years, my mind felt like a constant argument with itself. One part of me wanted growth. The other part wanted comfort. One part wanted discipline. The other part wanted escape. And living that way is exhausting. You wake up every day carrying invisible tension, the tension of unfinished goals, broken promises, delayed potential, quiet disappointment. But slowly, the habits I built started removing that tension from my life. Not all at once, quietly, one repeated action at a time. And eventually I noticed something beautiful. I no longer needed to constantly convince myself to change. I had already changed, not completely, but fundamentally. That's the power of small, consistent habits. They change your identity before they change your results. And when your identity changes, your life begins changing naturally. Looking back now, the habits that transformed my life were never extreme. They were simple, but repeated long enough to matter. Waking up without immediately consuming noise, protecting my attention, keeping small promises to myself, writing down my thoughts instead of escaping them, beginning tasks before I felt ready, accepting repetition instead of chasing emotional highs. Those habits sound ordinary, because they are. That's the point. Real success habits usually look unimpressive while they're happening, but quietly, they change how you think, how you feel, how you carry yourself, how you respond to difficulty, how you shape your future. And maybe the biggest lesson I learned is this: discipline is not self-punishment, it's self-respect. That realization healed something in me, because I spent years treating discipline like war. Force yourself, push harder, hate your weakness. But sustainable growth rarely grows from self-hatred. It grows from self-respect. From deciding your future deserves protection. Your mind deserves clarity. Your goals deserve consistency. Your life deserves intention. That's when discipline stops feeling heavy. Because you're no longer forcing yourself to become someone else. You're finally supporting the person you want to become. That shift changes everything. And honestly, I still have difficult days. I still lose focus sometimes. Still feel overwhelmed sometimes. Still struggle. But the difference now is profound. I trust myself again. That trust changed my life more than motivation ever did. Because motivation comes and goes. But self-trust creates stability. It creates resilience. It creates quiet confidence. The kind that doesn't need constant validation. And maybe that's what many people are truly searching for. Not endless productivity, not perfection, peace. The peace of knowing your habits are no longer destroying your future quietly. The peace of knowing your actions align with your intentions. The peace of becoming someone you can finally rely on. That feeling is life-changing. And if there's one thing I hope you take from this audiobook, it's this. Your life does not change in one dramatic moment. It changes in small repeated moments that slowly become identity. The way you speak to yourself, the way you begin your mornings, the way you handle discomfort, the way you protect your attention, the way you respond after failure. Those moments seem small, but they quietly become your future. That's why consistency matters so much. Not because perfect routines make you superior, because repeated actions shape who you become. And the beautiful part is, you do not need to transform your entire life tonight. You do not need perfect motivation. You do not need to become a different person overnight. You just need to begin rebuilding trust with yourself. Quietly, patiently, honestly. One habit at a time, one kept promise at a time, one intentional day at a time. Because eventually those quiet habits become something much bigger. They become confidence, clarity, direction, peace. And one day you look back and realize the person you wanted to become was never built through intensity. They were built through repetition. quiet repetition. That's how my life changed, not loudly, quietly. And before you go, download the free 7-day Quiet Success Habit Reset. It's a simple step-by-step guide designed to help you rebuild discipline, focus, and self-trust one day at a time. One quiet habit each day, no extreme routines, no unrealistic pressure. Just practical actions that help you regain control of your life again. And if this audiobook connected with you deeply, you can also explore the full Mayobook edition with deeper exercises, journal prompts, reflection systems, and habit trackers designed to help you continue this transformation beyond listening. Because this is only the beginning. The quiet habits you repeat today become the life you live tomorrow. And maybe tonight, for the first time in a long time, you stop trying to change your entire life at once. Maybe tonight you stop declaring war on yourself. Maybe tonight you stop measuring your worth by how perfect you've been lately. And instead, you begin smaller, quieter, more honestly, because real personal growth is not built through pressure alone. It's built through returning after distraction, returning after failure, returning after difficult days, returning after losing momentum. That's what disciplined people actually do. They return, again and again, without turning one bad day into a broken identity. I wish I understood that earlier. For years, every mistake felt permanent. Every setback felt personal. Every inconsistency felt like proof that I would never truly change. But growth does not belong to people who never struggle. It belongs to people who keep reconnecting with themselves after they do. That realization changed my relationship with failure forever, because failure stopped becoming evidence that I was broken. It became feedback, awareness, redirection, and strangely enough, that made discipline feel lighter, more human, more sustainable. Maybe you needed to hear that too. You do not need to become perfect to rebuild your life. You just need to stop disappearing from it. One quiet decision at a time. One honest moment at a time. One repeated habit at a time. That's how confidence is built. That's how focus is rebuilt. That's how identity changes. Quietly, and if part of you still feels behind, still feels ashamed, still feels uncertain whether you can truly become disciplined, I want you to remember something important. The version of you that wants a better life is still there. Buried underneath distraction, buried underneath exhaustion, buried underneath inconsistency, but still there, and every quiet habit you build helps uncover that version again, slowly, patiently, honestly. So tomorrow morning, don't focus on becoming extraordinary. Focus on becoming reliable. Keep one promise, protect 1 hour, complete one important task, create one moment of silence. That is enough, because success is rarely built in dramatic moments. It's built in ordinary moments, repeated consistently. That's the truth that quietly changed my life, and maybe it will quietly change yours too.